Pan Zhong was the nearest. He did not notice the mark when he brought Mingshi Yin up the mountain. Fear filled his heart when he saw the sign of witchcraft on Mingshi Yin's glabella. No wonder Mr. Fourth was affected. It's a witchcraft trap. There aren't many witchcraft cultivators under great Yan skies. Who did this to Mr. Fourth? Pan Zhong exclaimed in surprise. Zhou did not answer Pan Zhong's question. He looked at Mingshi Yin and asked, "It's near the Measure Heaven River? There might be traps all along the river bank." "Master, I'm all right. I'm just feeling a little tired. This witchcraft has only restricted 60% of my cultivation base. It's not that serious." He managed to hurry back from Measure Heaven River overnight with 60% of his cultivation base restricted. It had to be said that his tenacity and will to survive were exceptionally shocking. Sometimes, Zhou wondered if Ji Tiandao merely picked his disciples to fulfill the words of the poem. They're all exceptionally talented, and their names fit with the poem. I think there's too much of a coincidence here. Pan Zhong bowed and said, "It's witchcraft indeed. We must undo this quickly. Otherwise, it might spread until Mr. Fourth completely loses access to his cultivation base. At that time, it might be even more difficult to undo the witchcraft." Mingshi Yin was taken aback by Pan Zhong's words. He rolled his eyes and said, "Pan Zhong, you better not be trying to scare me." Zhou raised his hand. He stopped Mingshi Yin and gestured for Pan Zhong to continue. Pan Zhong acknowledged it and continued to say, "I'm not making this up. When I was learning the trade back in Clarity Sect, I read the records on witchcraft in the library. Witchcraft is divided into white witchcraft and black witchcraft. A cultivator will wander down the wrong path if they cultivate with malicious intentions. I was young and brash back then. I was obsessed with improving my cultivation base as quickly as possible, so I had looked up witchcraft. Alas, everyone in Clarity Sect guarded the secret tightly. On top of that, I couldn't find any seniors who had learned witchcraft and were willing to teach me." Zhou Jifeng asked curiously, "Is that why you chose the 3-yin style?" "The Clarity Sect's elder only told me that I'm suited for the 3-yin style, but he didn't tell me that I had to pair it with the 6-yang technique. I only learned about the balance between yin and yang after I met old Senior Ji," Pan Zhong said. "And?" Zhou Jifeng asked. Pan Zhong continued to say, "Speaking of witchcraft restrictions are similar to cultivation seals. They would slowly corrode a cultivator's meridians and block them. In fact, the Clarity Sect seal block technique is created based on a witchcraft technique as well." The others nodded. This was why Pan Zhong was so confident and volunteered to seal the Dark Knight's cultivation bases. Pan Zhong said, "In any case, the sooner we undo the witchcraft, the better it is for Mr. Fourth. In Mr. Fifth's case, her cultivation base has been completely sealed. The spellcaster must have cast a seal from a close distance. That's why it took effect immediately. For this reason, the outcome will be the same regardless of when we undo the witchcraft." Zhou Jifeng asked, "Since you know so much about witchcraft, do you know of any way we can break the spell?" Pan Zhong nodded. "I remember reading about a method to undo the spell. It's also the most trusted and reliable method. This requires the spellcaster to undo the spell itself. The second method is to cultivate Zen according to Buddhism or to cultivate Taoist methods. Once the victim's cultivation base surpasses the spellcaster's cultivation base, the victim will be able to undo the spell. However, this method is infeasible. After all, how can one continue to cultivate if one's cultivation base is sealed? So what you mean to say is that there's nothing we can do about the spell on Mr. Fourth?" Pan Zhong shook his head. He cupped his hands together at Zhou and said, "I'm afraid that the Pavilion Master is the only one capable of undoing it." "Pavilion Master?" Little Yuaner and Zhou Jifeng turned to look at Zhou. Pan Zhong explained, "The third method is to have a cultivator who's much more powerful than the spellcaster forcibly break the spell. Otherwise, the conflict between witchcraft and primal chi would cause the cultivator's meridians to break, and the cultivator would implode and die. Hence, the Pavilion Master is the only one who can do this." Although Pan Zhong's explanation made sense, Zhou was speechless. Outwardly, he remained as steady as Mount Tai, but inwardly he thought to himself, "What should I do?" Everyone's eyes were trained on Lu Zhou at this moment. Mingshi Yin cowed out and said, "Please undo the restriction for me, master." Lu Zhou stroked his beard as he tried to think of a way to solve this. Since there were witchcraft traps around the Measure Heaven River's fish dragon village, this means he could not simply send people from the evil sky pavilion there. After all, if someone like Mingshi Yin fell prey to it, there was no doubt the others would be more susceptible to falling into the trap. It seemed like he had no choice but to personally investigate the fish dragon village. As for undoing the witchcraft restriction, Lu Zhou was stumped. He had no good solution for this. After all, he could not possibly tell these people that his cultivation base was only in the Brahmin Sea realm. At this moment, Duanmu Sheng, who had received news about what happened, arrived in the Great Hall. After learning the ins and outs, he instantly pleaded, "Master, although junior brother frequently makes mistakes, he's been doing a good job lately. Please save him, master." Zhou Jifeng and Pan Zhong pleaded on Mingshi Yin's behalf as well. If this was in the past, Ji Tiandao would have most likely leaped into a great rage and kicked all of them out. However, it was undeniable that Mingshi Yin had been doing a good job lately. Although Mingshi Yin's loyalty was not as stable as Duanmu Sheng or Little Yuaner, he was dependable when it came to completing missions. All Mingshi Yin needed was a little discipline. Lu Zhou considered all of these for a moment before he finally waved his hand and said, "Come with me." Mingshi Yin was overjoyed when he heard this. He rose to his feet and followed Lu Zhou like an obedient child. Meanwhile, the others sighed in relief when they heard Lu Zhou's words. They watched as Mingshi Yin followed Lu Zhou into the hidden chamber. Little Yuaner smiled as she said confidently, "Since Master is dealing with the witchcraft spell, there won't be any problem." Zhou Jifeng nodded and said, "The Pavilion Master has a profound cultivation base. This minor spell is nothing to him." Pan Zhong nodded as well, but he said nothing. Duanmu Sheng glanced at the two of them and said, "Since Old Fourth is afflicted by witchcraft, both of you will do." "What do you mean, Mr. Third?" Pan Zhong and Zhou Jifeng were puzzled. Swoosh! Duanmu Sheng raised his overlord and said excitedly, "Spar with me." Pan Zhong, Zhou Jifeng. Inside the hidden chamber. This was Mingshi Yin's first time in a hidden chamber. After all, no disciples were allowed to enter the hidden chamber. In the past, they had thought their master was hoarding treasure in here. Since there was no ventilation in the hidden chamber, and their master usually spent all his time cultivating in the hidden chamber, it was impossible for them to sneak a peek. It was only natural that he was excited now that he was granted entry. He looked around curiously. There were various secret tomes lying on the table and an assortment of weapons on the racks. There were sabers, spears, rods, and maces. There were even weapons of other designs lying in the corner. He was awed by this scene. It seemed like his master had collected many treasures throughout his millennia of domination. "Sit down." Lu Zhou pointed at the floor. With that, Mingshi Yin quickly regained his senses. He hastily sat with his legs crossed and focused his eyes on one spot. Lu Zhou stroked his beard and stood behind Mingshi Yin. "My cultivation base is only in the Brahmin Sea 8 Meridians realm. Moreover, it's not the true Brahmin Sea 8 Meridians realm. My avatar is only the mighty 4 quadrants. There should be no problem for me to examine his body, but it would be nigh impossible for me to break the spell." At this moment, Lu Zhou discovered Mingshi Yin was sweating profusely. It seemed like the restriction was acting up. Based on his condition now, it seems like the spell has already restricted 80% of his cultivation base. He raised his wizened hand and gently pushed it against Mingshi Yin. His primal chi flowed through his palm into Mingshi Yin's meridians. Mingshi Yin was shocked. Master's cultivation base is indeed profound. He's capable of suppressing his nascent divinity tribulation realm's primal chi to such a gentle level. The gentler it was, the lower the probability that it would hurt Mingshi Yin's meridians. Lu Zhou controlled his primal chi and inspected Mingshi Yin's meridians. He gently tapped Mingshi Yin several times. Tap, tap, tap. Lu Zhou increased his output. Mingshi Yin was a cultivator who had connected his 8 meridians a long time ago. This amount of primal qi coursing through his meridians would not do him much harm. However, when Lu Zhou's primal qi came in contact with the witchcraft spell, he felt a retaliating force. Mingshi Yin frowned and immediately broke out in sweat. Lu Zhou thought to himself, so this is the power of witchcraft. He tried to bypass the restriction to inspect Mingshi Yin's other meridians. However, as soon as he tried to do that, the witchcraft spell seemed to gain a will of its own and suddenly attacked. Preposterous! Lu Zhou pulled his hand back. However, the witchcraft's power shot out from Mingshi Yin's back like a surge of energy. Lu Zhou waved his arm instinctively. He instantly went into the state after he had comprehended the heavenly writing. From his dantian to his sea of qi, from his brain and eventually to his entire body, a faint blue light appeared and repelled the attack of the witchcraft spell. It did not stop there. It rode on the momentum and entered Mingshi Yin's back. Bang! Mingshi Yin fell forward from the impact. At the same time, he felt the strange power from the witchcraft spell in his body disappear. Initially, Mingshi Yin thought Lu Zhou was being rough. However, joy overwhelmed him when he felt the witchcraft restriction in his body had disappeared. Although he was reeling from the impact, he did not feel unwilling or dissatisfied. Clang! Mingshi Yin crashed onto the rack of weapons, causing the weapons to fall on the ground. Meanwhile, in a dark room in Great Yan's palace, from the glow of a candle that was blocked by a screen, one could see the room was in a mess. Behind the screen, a girl dressed in brocade garments was cultivating with her eyes closed. Her expression changed slightly before she suddenly spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. Furious and flustered, she swiped her hands across the table, sending everything on the table to the ground. She mumbled with a hint of fear, "Someone managed to break my spell? Who is it?" Lu Zhou was shocked as well when he sent Mingshi Yin flying. At this moment, he felt the same refreshing sensation he had after he had successfully nullified the Brahmin lullaby. He was certain he would gain extraordinary power by comprehending the heavenly writing. In any case, this was not the time to be thinking about such things. He quickly turned to look at Mingshi Yin. Mingshi Yin, who had felt the witchcraft restriction disappear, could also sense his meridians and Dantian's sea of qi that were previously blocked became unblocked. His pain from being sent flying was inconsequential compared to this discovery. He quickly circulated his primal qi to stabilize himself before he kneeled and said, "Thank you for undoing the restriction, Master. Your skills are peerless." Lu Zhou looked at Mingshi Yin with nary a change in his expression. The heavenly writing is truly extraordinary and powerful. It's even capable of suppressing witchcraft. Lu Zhou was still lost in his thoughts about the heavenly writing, while Mingshi Yin's attention was drawn by the weapons around him. He picked up 2 weapons and appraised them. "Master, what are these?" It was neither a sword nor a hook, even though it resembled both items on both ends. The blade was serrated. It was an extremely peculiar design. The other weapon resembled a scabbard. Lu Zhou's gaze fell upon these 2 weapons. Ding! Retrieve weapons, separation hook and scabbard. Recommended owner, Mingshi Yin. Lu Zhou stroked his beard. There were certainly some forces at play in the hidden chamber. Whether it was fate or pure coincidence, Mingshi Yin had somehow stumbled upon this weapon. Before Lu Zhou could say anything, Mingshi Yin said with a smile, "Master, I think these weapons suit me. This blade, this scabbard, I like incongruous items like these. I'm sure it's at least an earth-grade weapon." He paused for a moment before he read the small inscription on the scabbard out loud. "C'est pas un hook?" Since Mingshi Yin did not test the weapons and only appraised them with his eyes, it was only natural that he thought they were earth-grade weapons. The separation hook and scabbard seemed to have been lying around in the hidden chamber for a long time. They seemed old. However, since the system had recommended Mingshi Yin as the owner, it would definitely become a heaven-grade weapon after it was activated. When Lu Zhou saw Mingshi Yin's reluctance to part with the separation hook and scabbard and the ingratiating smile on Mingshi Yin's face, he shook his head and said, "Put them down." "Huh." Mingshi Yin was slightly stunned. Then, he carefully placed the separation hook and scabbard on the floor. He did not dare to oppose his master. Zhou quickly found an excuse and said, "You've just entered the nascent divinity tribulation realm, and your cultivation base isn't stable enough for now. It's still too early for you to handle a heaven-grade weapon." When Ming-Shi heard this, he felt disappointed. However, when he heard the hidden meaning in his master's words, he became happy again. Based on his master's words, it seemed like the separation hook would be given to him sooner or later. "Yes, master. I'll get stronger as quickly as I can," Ming-Shi said excitedly. Zhou stroked his beard and nodded before waving his hand dismissively. Ming-Shi understood this was his cue to leave. When he reached the door of the hidden chamber, he turned around and looked at Separation Hook, clearly unwilling to part with it. After Ming-Shi left, Zhou surveyed the items in the hidden chamber that were messily strewn everywhere. Fortunately, the hidden chamber was spacious. "I'll just let it stay messy. It won't do me any harm. Anyway." He raised his hand, and the separation hook and scabbard flew into his hand. After a short while, Zhou finally emerged from the hidden chamber into the great hall. He discovered that Duanmu Sheng and the others had left. At the same, he saw Ming-Shi gesturing excitedly to Liu Yuan as they spoke, while Liu Yuan would gasp in surprise intermittently. Zhou walked over to them. When his two disciples saw him, they instantly bowed and saluted him. "Master." Ming-Shi. "Yes, master. Although the spell's broken, you shouldn't be careless." "Yes, master." Ming-Shi replied obediently. Zhou stroked his beard and nodded. Initially, he had no intention of leaving Golden Court Mountain for the time being. After all, with his current cultivation base, the best course of action for him would be to stay in the Evil Sky Pavilion and think of ways to earn merit points through his disciples as he slowly built his strength. However, the truth behind the Fish Dragon Village incident was extremely crucial. It was also related to the witchcraft elite in the palace. If he could get to the bottom of this, he might be able to apprehend the person who sealed Zhao Yu's cultivation base. Another factor that made Zhou view this matter with the utmost importance was that the system's mission list clearly stated that investigating the truth behind the Fish Dragon Village incident would earn him 3,000 merit points. The system had never rewarded him with 3,000 merit points for a single mission before. The importance of this matter was clear. Finally, Zhou said, "I'll be leaving for the Fish Dragon Village first thing in the morning.